So again, thanks for having me. For those that I haven't met, I'm the Associate Director for Online Systems at IITD. Yes, we're working on deploying a pretty big roadmap of work on introducing new systems, keeping us up to date, and lifting our game in terms of online learning deliveries. So in these presentations, and I'm hitting the road running through schools. Hopefully, you haven't heard me exactly the same already in some other form. But the way I usually start is talking a little bit about the background, basically the frameworks and the roadmap itself. And then I try to jump in as quickly as possible into the cool stuff, where you get a bit of a taster of things that either are coming or are potentially coming or are coming in some shape or form in the near future. So if that's all right, I'll start by sharing my screen, main screen, like this. Can I see a couple of thumbs up if a presentation came up on everyone's screen? All right, good, thank you. So the digital learning environment, what is that? All right, so the reason why we started talking about a digital learning environment was in preparation actually for capital funding exercises from last year. But also having consulted with schools, having analyzed the state of our systems and so on. And one of the things that came up in a lot of the actually academic literature produced mostly by schools of education and researchers in educational technologies is that it was time to shift the narrative from Moodle or LMS as being the center of the universe to something a little bit larger than that, the digital learning environment. And the conversation was no longer meant to be around, oh, do I pick this system, or do I pick that system, do I migrate from here to there, but more along the lines of what is a digital learning environment supposed to deliver? What are the defining characteristics? So that's what we represented in the circle that you see. If you look on the outer circle, you see these characteristics. So we start by interoperability in the top right-hand corner. That is a characteristic that is obviously quite important when you have an ecosystem made up of many parts. You need them to talk nicely and work well together. You cannot, for example, have any chance of achieving some semblance of a seamless user experience if your systems are not talking to each other very well. Personalization is very much an outcome that we're trying to achieve. So we want to make sure that our learning experiences are as personalized as possible. And that really means understanding our learner as best as we can. And that's where the analytics, advising and learning assessment piece comes in, because that's where a lot of the data is generated that can drive and inform personalization activities in addition to systems that make it easier to handle. Collaboration is a very important graduate attribute that our students need to have when they leave. Most of them are not going to be, living on an island by themselves. They need to develop collaboration skills. Our academics need to be able to collaborate on content and delivery of our services. So collaboration as both a feature of a digital learning environment and tools that we put in to make it easier, it was an important thing to consider. And finally, we have content and universal design. Ultimately, that is what we end up putting in our digital learning environment and present as content that we use in our deliveries. And we need to make sure that it is up to scratch, that it is renewed frequently, that it feels contemporary, but also that it's accessible as much as possible to people with varying degrees of disability. So how does that actually translate then into that shift in the narrative? So, well, we kind of used to talk about Moodle, and that's it, middle, center of the universe is Moodle. And now Moodle is kind of like this spinal cord off of which all of these different functionalities and associated systems hang off of. So Moodle is one part, a central part, but one part of this digital learning environment, and that is a shift in this narrative that we are engaging in. But perhaps more interestingly, how do we go from this into an actual roadmap and project plans? What are we doing this year and in the next few years? It requires a little bit of, I guess, geometry. We transform a circle into a rectangle. So the outer layer became these streams of work from collaboration on top to interoperability and integration. Then we tried to figure out what are we going to do this year and in the next few years. Just think of these titles as 2019, 2020, 2021, and then we filled in the blanks. So what I'm going to do briefly now is go over some of the salient points here. I'll share a link to a document where you can maybe look at this into more detail, where we actually go box by box. But if we look at what's in this year's program of work, on top we start with Office 365. So some of your colleagues are currently actually at Griffith with one of our guys in a workshop facilitated by Griffith, attended by other universities that have implemented Office 365 and Teams in greater depth than we have. I believe there's Edith Cowan University, UNSW, but I think even UTS, definitely Griffith, and Microsoft itself obviously facilitated the event. And we hope they'll come back to us with use cases and personas that are fit for purpose for CQ, so we can figure out how best to implement this toolset that we already have, that we already give to our students, but we need to better integrate it for desired learning and teaching outcomes. Among other things that we have that are potentially on the horizon, it seems like Microsoft has invested in Teams quite heavily, and in some institutions, it has overtaken the role that Echo and Zoom provide. That is, I'm not promising that, but that's certainly a direction that some universities are actually taking, and I'm keen to see and hear back from our guys when they come back from those that present specifically on that topic. We're also working on a learning content management system for HE, Moodle in particular this year. It may not end up being an actual off-the-shelf type platform. We're looking at different options, but we are trying to address a couple of issues with content. The biggest one being discoverability of content. So we have over 1 million assets, or certainly we have a lot of assets. I think it actually was 1 million assets. But we know that some are more or less reusable, and we want to facilitate reuse and discoverability of good quality content. And then a few other things around workflows, archiving, potentially even copyright, and things like that you get out of good management of learning content. In the section on content and universal design, Cherie will, I think Cherie is one of those rooms, tiny person at the back there. She's working with Kendall and probably a number of you here on a sort of curriculum refresh, Moodle revamp. I'm not sure we have a good name for it yet, project. But effectively, what we're trying to do there is we have an up-to-date version of Moodle, but we're not leveraging all of the navigation and other functionality. We have invested a lot in iChange and Be Different, but we haven't brought any of those learnings into our biggest Moodle sites. And we haven't really invested a lot of time and effort into building good exemplars of content, or haven't revisited that in some time. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do in this large stream. In the rapid content development box, I'll just say H5P and leave it at that because I'll demonstrate that, but that's an interesting new way of rapidly creating content straight into Moodle without having to use external tools. And I'll talk a bit about augmenting that virtual reality as well as we're investing in. Personalization, a lot of that is kind of behind the scenes, and granted, a lot of the projects that have the label personalization could fit elsewhere, and others that are in some other box could very well go into personalization. But we are looking at, under the digital library project, for example, to enhance the use of reading lists and allowing academics to customize really what they need for their units, and also expose some of the recommendations, or kind of like a recommender system functionality that allows students to see what else that might be useful to them to consume as resources. But if I go a little bit further down under analytics, advising and assessment, we are working on a predictive learning analytics project, which builds on Easy Connect, which many of you know, but bringing in the CRM into the mix, and some machine learning to predict student outcomes. And we're investing a lot in contract cheating. So we are piloting currently a Turnitin tool, and that is a sort of a tool that compares the students' writing to past examples of their writing to see any massive changes in writing style, which are flags of potential contract cheating. But we're also investing in internal tools to surface flags that raise suspicions of potential contract cheating. We are doing a pilot of micro-credentialing and trying to replace also Mahara with a new version of an e-portfolio with another vendor. So that's under that micro-credentialing banner. And of course, the last row, that's really plumbing. We're keeping our systems up to date, upgrading them, making them better bit by bit. So it's largely invisible, but very important. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, there's another column called strategic incubation. That's a mechanism for us to make sure that we kind of like get ahead of the game, that we're not just following what others are doing, so that we have the space, the time, the resources to explore technologies that may not actually exist really yet as something we can buy, that are maybe still in the thought bubble stage by researchers in this space, but things that we kind of feel might come, and we want to do our homework before they get there. Some of them you may actually think, oh, this is actually coming a lot sooner than we thought. So bottom right-hand corner, you see curriculum mapping. I think that they'll probably need to get out of strategic incubation into something more practical sometime soon. Similarly, we are going through a sort of activities where we are rethinking which one of these things really need to happen in next year and the year after that. Something we're going to probably try and pull sooner, some push later, add a few things, for example, as we're receiving quite a lot of new directives from NIC. One of those I'll point out is currently in the future column. We have in the personalization stream something called AR/VR analytics, which is a little bit cryptic, but it really stands for Learner Record Store. And AR/VR analytics is just one example. But a Learner Record Store is a way for us to capture learning activity data that is beyond mere click data. I might touch a bit on that later on. And it's peppered with interesting stuff like, smart chatbots, and as I mentioned, curriculum mapping, moving into XAPI compliance, and neat tools like intelligent marking and online proctoring. So I'm coming to the end of the boring bit. I just wanted to point out that there's a link here, that I'll share these slides later on, but there's a link on StaffNet where you can access some comprehensive documents where you can read more in detail about each one of these projects. Keep in mind, these are living documents. None of this is set in stone. This is all very flexible. We need to still workshop stuff with schools and not to mention yourselves to rejig our plans for the next few years. But it gives us a bit of a framework through which to operate, and it gives a bit of structure. And that's really what we're doing right now. It's this engagement with senior leadership groups, with schools, students, academic and teaching staff, and channeling all of that through our project board and the university executive in the end. All right, that is the end of the slideshow. I am going to get into showcasing a couple of things, making sure that we have enough time for questions later on. All right, so let me start with a couple of things that are just in Moodle. The first few things I'll show are extremely simple, but I just want to point out there is new functionality that we haven't really used a lot in the past. Sorry, that may have been for a while and we haven't used, or that is completely new. So this is, you're seeing some sort of, I think, test on development environment that I have where I'm trying to demonstrate something that we call user tours. A user tour is something that you would find on many new websites, especially those that have kind of like an application. It's to train people on how to use different functionalities or parts of a website. So this is really a three-step one, extremely simple, just to demonstrate the point. But we start by saying, Moodle 3.6 has a new interface, you can access your messages from any page using this icon. This is the end of the tour. Wow, that was quick. Anyway, you can position this on any part of the site and say, well, if you click on the logo, it does this. If you click on this button, it does that. It's to induct people who are new to a site. So that's a new functionality that has been around, I think, in the previous version of Moodle, but it hasn't really been used or advertised, and we're scoping how to actually do that at scale. One other thing that is quite interesting is the use of audio in Moodle, which is kind of new in this new version. So you may have noticed that anytime you go into anywhere where you have an editor in Moodle, so whether it's in a forum or whether it's in Gradebook or anywhere really, you now have this record audio button, which means that pressing this button, you can record and it saves straight into Moodle. You don't need to record it somewhere else. The reason why I'm pointing that out is because there was a couple of studies done at the University in Victoria, in Melbourne, I forget which one, but they were dealing with units with very large cohorts of students. So one of those first-year units with enrollments in the hundreds. And markers struggled to provide meaningful feedback. They obviously resorted to having kind of like snippets of text that are copy-pasted every time with very minimal adjustment and kind of canned responses. And I think students see straight through that. So what they've opted to do instead was, when it was time to give feedback on assignments, to give them 1-minute audio recordings. You can say a lot more in a minute than you can type. It's always personalized, and you get that like human touch to it. With you get the academics' intonation and voice, and you get a bit of empathy. Now you can do that through Turnitin tools as well, obviously, but it is now also a part and parcel what you can do in Moodle. All right, outside of Moodle, I talked about H5P. So H5P, oops, I am in the wrong part of H5P. H5P is a web-based method for creating content. What I'll do is I'll show you 2 examples, but you need to understand that with H5P, you can create some 20, 30 different activity types. This particular activity type is on how to enhance video with added functionality. I've done this one, and it was extremely simple, just as a proof of concept. I took a TED Talk from YouTube, and I'll just fast forward to roughly where I have this little dot.
I called it learning, he called it breaking. So I had to decide at some point, what was I going to do with my life? Sat down with a careers advisor, and she's like, Michelle, academically, I have a list view of the perfect jobs.
All right, so I've embedded at this particular point in time a rather silly quiz question, which asks the participants to try and guess what sort of career did the advisor think that she should pursue. And if we choose, I don't know, motivational speaking, which was clearly not the right answer, you can see your score. I could have programmed this to say, go back to the beginning of the video if you got it wrong, or continue. I could ask more questions, I can show the solution, and so on. So that's an example of how to enhance a video in a very simple way. There is quite a lot of functionality that you can explore there as well. Another example that I demonstrated the other day with the School of Nursing is this human body one. So it's an image of a skeletal system that you see here, and then there's a slider that shows a muscular system. Again, this was built in 2 or 3 minutes. I went to Google, I found 2 images, one of a skeleton, one of a muscle, uploaded them, gave them a name, and told them where I want the slider. And that gets uploaded to Moodle, and you can just use it. Literally 5 to 6 minutes of work, assuming you can find the images quickly enough. And just while we're at it, just to look at the richness of stuff that's in there, there are interesting new things that are putting out, such as branching scenarios. Branching scenarios are things that you're probably not unfamiliar with, but are very useful in scenario teaching. So when you have, like the example that's here on this screen that I won't play, but it was built to train people that are going into who are being trained for social workers. So this is the example of a home visit to a person. There's some videos in there, and at certain points in the story, they're asked to make a decision, such as, do I sit here, do I sit there, or do I sit there? And if they choose the wrong place where to sit in the room, a place where they might not be able to escape if it's unsafe, they might be giving some feedback as to, you know what, you may want to kind of sit close to the exit just in case someone goes nuts in that home visit. So it's kind of interfaces like that where you can have these branching scenarios. Again, I'm sure you've come across that with other tools like Lectora, for example, but this is another way of building it straight into the browser, straight into Moodle, no SCORM packages, a lot lighter, and a much less steep learning curve. What I wanted to point out there quickly, I borrowed this from another university where they've done a pilot. There's a very neat way of representing the types of activities. You can see there's a lot of focus, obviously, on assessment type stuff. So whether it's formative or summative, there's quite a lot of richness in terms of what you can do to construct assessments. But you have information, image, audio, video, and just very specifically quiz kind of stuff that you can do with H5P. And Moodle is working on bringing that into core Moodle in the very near future. But having seen UNSW, Macquarie, UTS, QUT pilot this rather successfully, we are gearing up. H5P is currently on our test server. It's being tested, and we'll be hopefully piloting that quite soon. So I talked a little bit about what UNSW is doing in that space. I won't go there again. While we're on the topic of content, quite a lot of investment is happening in virtual reality, augmented reality. Video 360 seems to be something that we're working a lot of. So this is one of ours. It's a bit of a prototype for, I think, for the vet school on building trades. So this is a construction that was part of a project where a lot of our students participated in. A little hint, it's actually the Vice Chancellor's new residence. We have these shots through the construction where we can look at the various stages of construction and how our students worked on this. This will be enhanced in the future. This is a bit of a prototype with embedded video and conversations and downloadable text and so on. So it has the ability to be very multidimensional, no pun intended, and quite rich as an experience that we're pursuing. And by the way, H5P resolves some of our Video 360 streaming problems. Right now, you can't put Video 360 into Moodle without, it just won't play. But via H5P, it probably can be as far as our testing goes. Moving on outside of content, some of the other exciting things we're looking at is intelligent marking. Intelligent marking isn't replacing academics for marking. I've had a question from the research office whether intelligent marking can automatically grade an entire thesis so that nobody else has to bother. Unfortunately, no. It's not there to replace markers, but it is there to help them. So if I show you an example of, I don't know, let's go to chemistry here. So let's say we have exams that have been, done and then uploaded or scanned. Each question on an exam, you can, dissect it, so to say, basically saying, what does it take to get the full, in this case, 10 points? And when something's missing, how do students bit by bit lose marks? So in this particular case, you have this chemical formula. Oh, God knows what this really is, but there are instructions here that the markers have put on how to get the full points. And then basically you just click on what the student has missed to get, in this particular case, 5 out of 10 points. Yes, there's a bit of an investment in making that work. Yes, it doesn't work for every discipline. I mean, I can potentially think there are some where it might be a little bit tricky. Like essays, like when an assignment is an essay, for example, a little bit too much work to do this. But for these types of questions, I can certainly see it working. But the richness of data that you get out of this, you get quite a lot of analytics out of this that can inform both a feedback loop on the quality of of the delivery of the teaching, where the gaps are, where the holes are, where we need to maybe review our exam questions. I mean, the whole gamut. You get quite a lot of rich data. But it's also powered by a little bit of an artificial intelligence. If I just scroll back down here to this answer grouping, I'll play this a couple of times. So you've got these exam questions on a math exam, and this artificial intelligence kind of OCRs people's handwriting and groups them by similarity. And then you can, in one go, kind of mark everyone who has had a similar answer. So let's go through this again. You've got this artificial intelligence that scans everything and kind of groups them by similarity of handwriting, gives a human the chance to override something that they missed. And then right now, these people, kind of same answer, in one click, I graded 4 people. People who have missing components, they get points lost, and people who left something blank, they get a 0. So this is what is meant by assisted marking, intelligent marking. It's not to replace you, it's to give you a little bit more time. Let's face it, marking is not an academic's favorite gig. Moving on, something on the topic of maths and science. This is a good example of a good feedback loop from our engagement through the Moodle steering group, for example. So this is a tool that we are trialing now, or actually figuring out how to put into Moodle on a more advanced LaTeX editor. I mean, you wouldn't be completely unfamiliar with these, but this is probably one of the most advanced. If I want to do some very fancy mathematics and code an integral of sine of x, but I'm trying to do this with my mouse, which is never fun. With a kind of digital pen, it's even better. So this is a kind of tool that you can use to translate handwriting into formulas. And they have functionality for mathematics like this, for linear algebra, for chemical formulas, physics formulas. So all of that is supported. So it's good for academics who are trying to write stuff very quickly, students who are doing stuff on the fly. There's quite a lot of use cases for this. I mean, it was actually requested, so we are actively working on plugging this in. Moving on to something a little different. I said earlier we're trying to replace Mahara with something else. One of the contenders is Portfolio, which is a modern, sorry, modern, a bit of a cliche. It's a company that took a asked themselves, how will we do an e-portfolio if we were to do it today? And it has this very clean Facebook or LinkedIn more like look. That's extremely intuitive. But I mean, I tried it a little bit as an end user. Compared to Mahara, I mean, the learning curve is literally trivial. So this is an example of a student's account. I think this guy, Nicholas from Swinburne, he was working on this couple of projects. One of them was a project on how to dismantle and reassemble a mixer for people who have RSI. So this is a project, and this is kind of what it ends up looking design-wise. I think he's an engineering student. In this portfolio, he's got all of these assets that he would have uploaded to get himself there. It's shareable on social media platforms, not to mention Radio Academic. You can tag it with skills. So, for example, think of even vet competencies can be tagged here. And it can be submitted for assessment, but it can also be used later on when you assemble a public-facing e-portfolio to showcase to your potential employers. The neat thing about that, I mean, sorry, there's actually many neat things. I can't cover them all. But one of the things I like looking at some of these other guys, looking at the connections they make. So this engineering student has connections with people in psychology, law, and education and teaching. So they are working very often on multidisciplinary projects, which we know very much is the reality in the working force once people graduate. I looked at also a little bit about how this integrates with social media platforms. The VC kind of indicated whatever you choose, it needs to integrate with LinkedIn. So kind of tick that box with at least this one. So looking at this guy's LinkedIn profile, where he has a link to his e-portfolio and some badges that came with. So a lot of these also combine micro-credentialing, digital badging with portfolios. And if I look at David's e-portfolio, which I think I probably opened, did I open it here? open it now. I can view his particular e-portfolio and what he has done as well. So it's also for our staff as well. Anybody would be able to benefit from something like that. And this is an example of how badges work. So he kind of engaged in this software as a service type training, and he's earned this particular badge. And I can see that this is part of some sort of pathway. So if I look at his pathway, this is the software as a service leader pathway, where you can find out about it. I can see that he's completed 5 milestones, and he's roughly 60% through. So he's done the marketing one, he's done the sales one, he's done the product one, but he's yet to do the operations and managerial work. So with these two, he will unlock the entire kind of collection of badges under this particular workflow. Now, some universities are using stuff like this, for example, for structured student orientation, where you need to unpack a couple of things such as how does the library work? How do I get my student ID card? Where's the canteen? You know, how to get my student card? A whole bunch of things. How to, you know, completing a safety training for my chemistry lab if I'm in that particular cohort. So those are some of these pathways that can be bundled together with the concept of micro-credentialing. So I think we've covered these ones. Yeah, I'll open a few of them. And just so that you understand that those of you who are interested in micro-credentialing, I mean, it's not something that is, there's no one size fits all. So we looked at what other people are doing. So if I look very quickly at RMIT, they have kind of incorporated their Center for Professional Development into this micro-credentialing thing to bring all that content in under the same house. And if I look at what they've got on offer, for example, and so they can kind of see what it might end up looking like when it's ready. You've got these things, kind of like a catalog of courses on a whole range of topics that you can search and filter through. If I look at something like, I don't know, is there anything interesting here? Okay, data literacy, I like that one. So this is something that they're offering only to their students. This particular one, others are open to the public. This one happens to be free. Some of them are paid for, but you go to this catalog, you learn what you'll get out of it. In their case, they partner with industry, so they have it always verified by a certain external authority, for example, and they give you a marketing spiel of why they would want to do that, and then they can enroll. If I look at how Deakin has done that, Deakin has decided that we're going to kind of keep top 3 categories. So they can either be about employability, about technical knowledge, or leadership. And they have these core offerings in each one of those categories, for example. And if I look at in this technical knowledge, you know, you can learn about digital learning, which is interesting for us as an audience here. And they've then gone and aligned it with 3 layers of competency, so to say. So something that's bachelor aligned, pre-master's aligned, or master level aligned. And you can find more information about it, what it costs, add it to a cart, and enroll. And what they're using this is a way to funnel then people into their program. So it's kind of a little bit like recognition of prior learning or credit transfer of sorts. And one final example, AGSM from UNSW. By the way, they're all using pretty much the same platform. They just visually represented differently. Whole range of these micro-credentials that you can acquire that build up to a bigger whole over time, if you like. So that's the micro-credentialing space. And one final thing I'll show you, we are, as you know, working on a predictive learning analytics product. So I'll showcase what it kind of looks like at a stage. We are frantically working with our developers to put in some additional functions and making it more consistent with university theming. So it will change quite a lot in the next fortnight, but functionally it's quite similar to what you see here on the screen, and it's quite similar obviously to what you would have seen in Easy today. So we've got here students in the unit Math 11218. I can see the predictions of success in this column. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then all the other demographic type information. If I so choose, I can add their weekly activity. So that's their Moodle activity, which you're familiar, again, format-wise from Easy. But the stuff that really is new, let me just get out of that so it's not going too much of screen space. In these contacts or interactions, we now are importing CRM data. So if there are student advisors who have committed comments or engaged with students on student advice type of interactions, they will be accessible to academics. It's all showing 0 because we haven't actually brought the data in yet. That's actually happening probably today. But an academic will be able to see some of that as well. And there's quite intuitive sort of navigation. So if for some reason I'm in charge of looking at people who have a low likelihood of success, who happen to be here on the Rockhampton campus and for some reason happen to also be, I don't know, in their first term, then I can, select them. I can select all of them and I can send them a message or a sort of nudge. The way these predictions work, that's a bit of machine learning. So we're using our historical data that we are funneling through a machine learning algorithm that applies a number of models and spits out the most accurate ones. At last report, I think I had some here on my screen, but I'm not going to dig it out. They're 85% roughly accurate overall in terms of the predictions, with a number of outliers, but mostly in relation to cohorts with low enrollments or historically high failure rates. So we're pretty happy with that as an added feature. But again, obviously our end users will be trained to take the whole picture when engaging with students and interacting on success strategies. So that's something we'll be piloting also very, very soon. There's a number of other pages here, but they're probably currently being developed and changing by the minute, so I'm not going to jump in out of here breaking something. But I'm going to stop sharing right now because with the audience that I have, I'm reasonably certain there's going to be questions. Or not?
Thank you, Pavle. I know Colette's got a question here, but has anybody else online got a question or a comment?
Pavle, I was just going to ask, what's the time frame for the H5P rollout?
Thank you for that question. Believe it or not, whenever I hit the road running with schools, first question that I get is about H5P. So, but this is quite consistent. So we basically today we talked to Catalyst about putting that in our test environment. We need to do a little bit of due diligence on stability, scalability. My hope is that within the next month or so, around July, August, that I'll be able to reach out to schools. Some of them have already been telling me who wants to pilot stuff, to conduct a little bit of a pilot and build a few exemplars in that space. We have Daryl Clare, who some of you know, who's also going to be helping us on this project as well. But it is something that's definitely on the cards for this year, unless testing tells me stay away. But given that a lot of other big institutions that are Moodle users have deployed it, I do not anticipate major stumbling blocks. So it's a watch and see for the next month or so.
Cool. Thank you. If you could keep VET in mind for the testing as well, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. Will do.
Cheers.
Pavle, I was interested in what IETD is looking at producing for accessibilities and the closed caption solutions that we need to have.
All right. So I do not have anything specific in my roadmap to address that in particular, because that's something that actually cuts across all of IETD. But there are certainly a number of projects or even programs of work under the banner of seamless user experience or enhanced user experience where that fits in. The tricky part there is really identifying good vendors that we can use across the board as opposed to in piecemeal applications. So when I was talking, for example, to Microsoft yesterday about what the future for Teams might be, There's going to be in that workshop where our guys are at the moment, and you might hear from Mari and Nick and James from my team when they come back. There's a university where they've used Teams for lecture capture with automatic transcription on the fly through Microsoft servers and services, and direct availability of that to end users. That is not something that's explicitly identified as a project that will happen tomorrow, but those are the types of tools that we're exploring. We understand accessibility is important. Accessibility is part and parcel of our procurement approach, so that whatever we're plugging in is compliant. I've seen the procurement documents we send out. We always ask for compliance and support for accessibility in general. But on the transcription side, we do not have a one-size-fits-all yet, but we're certainly looking very actively and keeping it front and center.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Pavle? I think that's it, Pavle. You might be on the hook now. I think you might have been expecting a lot more.
Well, usually I get bombarded, but that's all right. Usually I have huge audiences, such as for schools. What I want to point out is I will share these slides. In one of the slides, there's a link to StaffNet. If something else comes that you want to reach out with, comment, question, but this is where you can do that. And we really want to get as much feedback as possible, because our next step is doing actual workshops, not just information sessions like these, but actual workshops to look at what to actually keep on our roadmap, and I'm guessing what to add to it. We've been told our roadmap is a huge improvement over the last few years, but you know, some people may want us to do a lot more, a lot faster. So we'll see what we can stomach and handle.
Okay.
But if there are no questions at the moment, I'll thank you for your time.
Yep, I think that's about it. Thank you very much, Pavle. And we'll let you know if anything pops up.
Cool. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.